I think that should do it. If you want to throw in the chat where you're signing in from, that's always fun. Make sure to do it to panelists and attendees, please. So we see it.
Okay,
Drora. See, Annika, you have to put in yours too.
I see Drora.
Yes, Papa, you have to quiet and mute yourself. It's up to you. What do you want? You want me to? Okay. So we're gonna move over everybody to be attendees. So thank you for coming. We will see you in a bit. So. Okay. So yeah, throw into the chat where you're from with panelists and attendees. And thank you all for coming. We'll give everybody another 2 minutes. New Rochelle in Connecticut, right? City is Connecticut, or it's some country that I don't know. And it's always quiet. You can talk. You have to say something first. We need a bit blank screen. So again, thank you all for coming. For those who don't see, we're throwing in the where we're from in the chat. So we got New Jersey, New Rochelle, Frankfurt, Germany, and Granada, but that's me, and Connecticut, and West Hampton. Thank you. It's just nice, and gives everybody a kind of cozy feeling where we know where we're all sitting around the world. So, although it seems pretty East Coast US, except for us, yeah. I'll give everybody another minute. Let me make sure this is working. Okay. Oh no, it's not 7:05. I wait till 7:05 or 12:05 or 6:05, right? Germany, 6:05? I think so. Yeah. Okay. So I'm sure people will be joining as we continue, but I don't like to make people wait who are here almost on time. So thank you all for coming to our New Works Wednesdays. This is a little bit of a different one because this is not a book that is publicly available. It is a book that was written, or sorry, not written, was compiled for a specific occasion, which we'll hear about soon. But it's not something you can go to the store and buy. It's something that you should be able to go to the store and buy, though, if you ask me, because I have used it and definitely has helped me because frustration, but you'll hear all about that in a few minutes. I want to just give you a few logistics. You're all on mute and your cameras are off. They will stay that way until after a little Q&A between Dalya and myself. Please, in the middle, throw into the chat or throw into the Q&A. I'll be monitoring it somehow as I'm doing this too. So we'll definitely see your questions and answer them either then or wait until we do our little Q&A, and then we'll ask you please to open your cameras and microphones. It makes it nice. And so that's the logistic part of it. Now I want to welcome you on behalf of the American Sephardi Federation Institute of Jewish Experience and the Schneier program for international studies at Yeshiva University. As always, it is really a pleasure to partner with them, and we do hopefully some wonderful programming. this will be a continuation of it today. I want to also formally invite our guest, or introduce our guest rather. So Dalya Arussy Di Veroli is the visual content creator at the Institute of Jewish Experience, which you see I run. And after studying art history and Arabic and doing an master's in urban planning, Dalya decided to focus on building social bridges rather than physical bridges, finding her way to the Institute of Jewish Experience. The Siddur, Four Corners of the Earth, is a project she and her husband took upon themselves in honor of their recent wedding. So on that note, if you can give us a little bit, I just gave you very little of your background. If you could expand upon that a little bit and explain why you went away somewhat from your studies and decided that this is what you're going to be working on in terms of your current job, and a little bit, start with that, a little bit of your background.
Okay, thank you. I do want to mention, I'm not really sure if we can do this with this type of forum, although we will be learning a little bit of Torah. So I do want to say that this is Le'ilui Nishmat, my grandmother who recently passed away, Esther Zahava Bat Yisrael Sarah. So with the introduction that was given, that's more of the academic stuff that I did, but there was a lot that I did during my studies that really took me to the path that I'm on now. In my undergrad, I was part of the Center for Ethnic, Racial, and Religious Understanding at Queens College. So while I was studying art history, I was also involved with on-campus programming that had to do with interfaith, intercultural work. And that sort of took, I'd say, more of my time than the academic stuff. And I enjoyed it a lot more, although I did enjoy studying art history. And then when I came to do my master's at the Technion in Israel, I can't say that the extracurriculars took more time because there was a lot of work, but it did take up a significant amount of time. And that work included the Ibrahim Leadership and Dialogue Project, which I had been a part of as a student in my undergrad. It's a program that takes you through the Middle East to experience it with other Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and to experience it rather than read about it on the news or in textbooks. So as a Technion student, I became part, I engaged with the students who are coming on that program from the US. I got together other students so that they can not only see leaders and how countries in the Middle East are run, but also have real conversations with people their age. And that sort of evolved. I became involved with other programs after I finished my degree with Yala Young Leaders, which also is a network of young leaders, say 20s, 30s, who are in the Middle East and North Africa. And all of these different programs sort of swept me up away from the academic side and brought me more to the social side of things. And now I don't necessarily do interfaith work, but definitely intercultural work, because within the Jewish experience there is a lot of cultural diversity. And basically, I am an example of that cultural diversity, the Ashkenazi mother, Yemenite father. So this really was close to home, and it was a natural fit.
Okay, so you have the bridges between religions, you have the bridges between Jews amongst themselves, but this is a step further. What made you decide to write, you don't write a Siddur. What made you decide to compile this Siddur? And if you can first start with explaining what's unique about this Siddur.
Okay, so definitely did not write the Siddur. Any mistakes in there, I will take responsibility for, but it's based on text that we gathered from other sources. The Siddur itself is 4 nusachim separated, so they're not all there's no attempt here to make one version of the prayer texts. We separated each of them so that they each have their place. And the idea behind it was whether you go to a synagogue that prays in Ashkenazi or whether you go to a synagogue that prays Sephardi, you will always have the right Siddur. I would like to say that this was my idea, and based on the background I just gave you, it might sound like it was my idea, but it actually wasn't. The idea came about from my husband, my fiance at the time, who thought that he was throwing out another ridiculous idea, and I jumped on board and made sure that we went through with it. Essentially, it's connected to Corona. I don't know how much it happened in the States, also because of suburbs and whatever, but in Israel, there was a street minyan basically every other corner because none of the synagogues were open. And so if none of the synagogues were open, you didn't really know which nusah I refer to versions of the prayer text you would fall into. You just went to whatever was close by. And so he came back one Friday night after going to a strictly 10-person minyan service outside without the right Siddur, and becoming frustrated, and there weren't extra Siddurim in anywhere because they were all coming from home. So he decided, wouldn't it be cool if we had a Siddur that had all of the versions, and then you wouldn't have to get stuck like this? And I said, yeah, that would be really cool. And that's how that came about.
So give us a little overview of what the Siddur actually is, what it looks like.
So I'm gonna show you basically a picture of the cover. I can show you just now, this is what it looks like in person. But
Well, while you're opening, before you open it, hold it up one more time, sorry. And so for those who don't read Hebrew, it says Arba Kanfot Haaretz, which is the four corners of the world, earth. So you want to start with explaining that?
Yeah, so that nice anecdote that I gave turned into something that was really personal. The four corners that we refer to, first of all, it is a verse in the book of Yeshayahu. I will let you know in a second. Yes, Yeshayahu. And it refers to the ingathering of the four corners. For those who know Hebrew and who might know this phrase, a lot of people say, Arba Kanfot Tevel. I didn't see a biblical source for that, so we called it Arba Kanfot Haaretz. The four corners in our Siddur refers to the four traditions that we come from. I, as I mentioned, come from an Ashkenazi and a Yemenite background. So those are two. And my husband comes from an Italian and a Middle Eastern, North African, Libyan background. So those are the four corners that we refer to. And that is the source for the name. Now I'll give you a little bit, I'll show you what it actually looks like, like up close. So you can see the cover.
Yep.
So the cover itself has a reference, the design has a reference to these four corners. Basically, as you might see, it is a Magen David, the Jewish star, but it is kind of broken down into four different paths. And each of those paths is our four corners. And this symbolizes the communities coming together in the one full Jewish experience. The Siddur, the inside of it, basically is built up of a communal Kabbalat Shabbat. Kabbalat Shabbat was something that was added later, so has basically no differences between the different nusachim. We have nusach Bene Romi, which is the Italian one. We have the nusach Edot Hamizrah. Sephardi Edot Hamizrah, I refer to the same version. Baladi, which is the Yemenite one. And then we have the Ashkenazi one. So the whole chunk of Shabbat prayers from the night to the following night is in one, is by section, by version. And then at the end, we have Hallel, which again is pretty standardized. We have the different Kiddushim for the nighttime, for the morning, and we have the blessings after meal of 3, as you notice, rather than 4 of the traditions, because the Italians have essentially switched over to the Ashkenazi tradition. So that
And
is,
when you say Italian, can you just explain what that means?
yeah. So the Italian one, it has a couple of names. Some people call it Italki. In ancient sources, it's called Minhag Loaz or Loazim, referring to Latin or Romantic language speakers. It was also called Minhag Bene Romi. My husband Siddur says Bene Romi on it. And later, there was also added the name Italiani, but essentially it relates to the Italians who came to the peninsula. You can say in the Second Temple or even further back to the times of the Maccabees. There was consistent communities there throughout the 2,000-year history. And so they have their own separate version of the prayers of the Tefillah.
So like we said, it comes from your 4 backgrounds, your 4 heritages. So I'm throwing out there for those who are Sephardim here in the community, in our talk today, there's no Sephardi in there. Sorry about that. There's no Bendigam.
There's no Sfard. There's
Sfard, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's no Sfard. Correct. And so can you give us a little bit about the different backgrounds? So that's Bnei Roma or Italkim. And you said that there are 3 others, so just give us a little overview.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, there are today mainly 5. I'm not going to refer to Sfard, but Sfard is essentially an extraction from the Ashkenazi one. So the Ashkenazi one essentially refers to Western and Eastern Europe. Sfard kind of took away from their Eastern Europe ones, but that one is based on, okay, I'll take a step back just to give some background on how these different traditions of the Siddur came about. There are like 2 major schools of Siddurim that we can say, like basically with the Talmud, for those who know, and other traditions. There's the land of Israel one, the Eretz Yisrael one, and there's the Babylonian. Because the Siddur wasn't actually written down and formed into the book that we know today until after the destruction of the Second Temple, which meant that people were already pretty dispersed. So the Ashkenazi tradition is considered more connected to the Eretz Yisrael tradition, and the Sephardi one is considered more connected to the Babylonian one. That being said, like with the Talmud, as time went by, the Babylonian one had more and more influence. So to make sort of like a sense of all of these, of the different traditions, we said we have the Ashkenazi one, the Sephardi one, the Yemenite one, and the Italian one. I'm just going to show you what it looks like on a map where these different minhagim are prayed. So as you see here, hopefully you see, this is a map from Rav Steinsaltz's book. I should also maybe preface this, the research that I am presenting is based on Rav Steinsaltz's book, Angelo Piatelli, who did a lot of research on this and released many Italian Siddurim, and based on two sort of introductions to Yemenite Siddurim. So this is a map from Rav Steinsaltz's book. It shows essentially, I know it's in Hebrew, so I'll just explain. These areas are the ones that pray Ashkenazi. So that includes Germany, obviously, France, Switzerland, former Czechoslovakia, Hungary, parts of Hungary, Lithuania, England, Ireland. Those are the general areas. Sfarad kind of took away from them and took Ukraine, some of Poland, some of Hungary, Romania. And the Sephardi one is essentially Spain, Portugal, Morocco, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, all of the Islamic countries that it got to them through basically the Ottoman Empire. And the Yemenite one is one little one over here in one of the corners of the earth. So this is basically the layout of basically people, Jews who came out of these countries. This is their praying traditions. The Sephardi one, actually, today we see it as a state, but it developed over time because, like Italy and like many other places, Spain wasn't a united state. And so their nusach kind of was different based on the kingdom that you were in, based on the city that you were in. And basically post-Inquisition, it became more consolidated. And it made, well, right before the Inquisition, and then it made its way with the refugees, those being expelled from Spain, it made its way to these countries. Sephardim didn't necessarily make it to Iran and Iraq, but because Sephardim got to right over here to the land of Israel, they came in touch with a lot of Kabbalists, and they were major influencers in the movement of Kabbalah. And through Kabbalah, it got to Iraq and Iran and to other places, including even down here. So they are essentially all over the Islamic world, except for in Yemen. Now I'll get to Yemen. Yemen, I'm gonna stop sharing.
Before you get to Yemen, because you just mentioned Iran, there was a question if you know in what way the Iranian nusach differs from the rest.
I don't know about specific nuances. Essentially, it's the same as Sephardi and Edot Hamizrah. And I'm sorry that I don't think Rani is here yet. I cannot tell you what the Spanish and Portuguese is different than those in North Africa, but it's essentially the same line of thought. The reason that we use the word Edot Hamizrah as opposed to Sephardi is because we're basing it on on my husband's mother who came from Libya, but also in Israel, I think there's most of the Siddurim say Sfaradim ve'Edot Hamizrah, so Sephardim and those from the Eastern countries, because just to say Sephardi would be confusing, I think, with the Sfard, and now it's kind of one. You can say either, but in Israel, most people say Edot Hamizrah because it's an extra distinguisher. So I don't know. Iran essentially does the same nusach. There probably are minor differences, but it's essentially the same one, and it came to them through the Kabbalists.
I just want to say one thing. Josh Mendez is here, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. But as far as I understand, that Spanish and Portuguese does differ from the Edot Hamizrah because they do not incorporate Kabbalah, the Kabbalistic type of piyutim.
So that makes sense, because anyone who would have gone, the Sephardim who came to Israel and then went on to other places would Yeah, so the Spanish and Portuguese didn't make their way through Israel, I believe, which means that they didn't make their way through the Kabbalah world. Yeah, so now I'm going to the Yemenites. The Yemenites, I'm referring to one of two options. Basically, Yemenites, there are those who pray Baladi. Baladi, the word itself means my country, and it is the one associated with the Jews who came there 2,000 years ago. And there's the Shami, which is literally refers to those from the Levant. And that one came later on with Sephardim and Kabbalah. So I am referring to Baladim, and I'll explain why, because the Shamim essentially came in like the Sephardim did in many, many countries. They were very, very knowledgeable in Torah, and so they kind of took over the nusachim that were there because people really trusted them. But when this Shami nusach came to Yemen, there were many that were against it, and basically used all these arguments of you cannot leave the tradition of your fathers, which is used a lot in halacha. There isn't quite halacha, but there's a lot of these arguments, and there were many synagogues that refused to incorporate the Shami nusach. The Shami nusach, again, there are nuances, but a lot of it is very similar to Edot Hamizrah and Sephardim. So the Baladi one is, some say it's based on the Babylonian one, which is probably true. Some say it's based on Eretz Israel. It probably has influences from both. The Yemenites, like the Italians, came to Yemen essentially before there was a written Siddur. So theirs is a collection from different places. Their two main influences, it is said, are Rambam and Rav Saadia Gaon, who are both influences in general for this community. Rambam from the 12th century and Rav Saadia Gaon from the 10th century. So Rav Saadia Gaon and Rav Amram Gaon, sorry, I'm going back a little with the history of the Siddur. Rav Saadia Gaon was one of the Gaonim who at his time in the 10th century decided that there needs to be a standardized collection of prayers, and he made basically his own. There were other collections going around, nothing really standardized, and he actually had a predecessor, Rav Amram Gaon, who did standardize it, and Rav Amram Gaon actually probably standardized it for a community in Barcelona at the time, but it made its way throughout the world. So Rav Saadia Gaon, his Siddur made its way to, we're talking about Gaonim in Babylon. Okay, so that's the Babylonian tradition. His Siddur made its way to Yemen. With regards to Rambam, he also, I don't know if he had an exact Siddur, but he had a tradition of the prayers, and Rav Yosef Kappa, who was a notable Yemenite rabbi, actually says that Rambam probably got his Siddur from Yemen, so I'm not really sure which came from which, but there was definitely influence on both sides. So that's basically, and because, as we saw, Yemen is in a little corner on the bottom of the earth, it didn't really disperse to other places, and its influence was fairly limited, as opposed to the Italian one, which Italy is like the center of the earth, and all these communities were coming through. So it probably had a lot of influences from other places, not to mention that there were synagogues praying in Ashkenazi and Sephardi rites throughout the centuries there. So there were essentially 3 nusachim being prayed on the peninsula, whereas in Yemen there was one until there were 2.
So a quick question that was posted here. Are there, the Yemenites, you're saying Baladi and Shami, So is there a region that had more of Baladi or Shami, or was it by city divided more, or like he said here, like more people in Sana use one and people in Aden use the other?
I don't know to say for sure. Sana'a was probably Baladi. I think in the north there was more Shami, but I don't hold me to this. I don't know for sure.
Yeah. And then I just want to put out there have been a few questions about the publisher, and is it in English, and is this historical explanation in your book? So at the beginning I kind of said it, but I'll say it again. So as much as this book is necessary and it should be out there with the historical explanation, this was done just for your wedding. And actually it's not, at this point, it's not allowed to be sold. So I'm putting it out there that as important as it is, that's what's there. And then there was another question about regions. Is the Italian version related to Romaniot as with the Jews of, like, as in the Romaniot of Greece?
Yes. So I did find that there was connection between them, not a ton. That being said, the Sephardi one probably had more influence in those places. There's no, sorry, the Italian one probably did have influence even regardless of Romano, because the Italian one, as opposed to the Yemenite one that was really only strictly in Yemen, the Italian one, there are sources that place it in 16th, 17th century Tzfat and in Salonika and Istanbul. So it did make its way there. There are connections. I know that there are connections. I can't give specific examples between the Romano and Italian ones. Again, probably those connections, as the Italian and Yemenite ones, are probably connected to the fact that these communities got there before a written Siddur was in place and before the prayers were canonized.
So building on that, do you have examples of items that are unique or different to different communities that you found when you were putting together this volume?
Even before we put together this volume, we found one connection, which we like to say is the story of how we met, my husband and I. One of the, I think, the most significant ones is there's a connection between the Italian and Yemenite traditions. In both of them, during Mincha in the afternoon prayer, there is no Aleinu, the final prayer isn't said. Whereas in Sephardim, by Sephardim and Ashkenazim, it is. And so we like to say that we were both students of the Technion, so we were both praying in the synagogue at that time. And when the rest of the congregation was going on with the last part, we stepped outside because our service essentially was over, and then we met outside the synagogue. That is not a true story, but we do like to tell it when we found out that there's that connection. But in terms of specific things that are related to Shabbat, because I don't know if I've mentioned this, but this Siddur is a strictly Shabbat Siddur. So one of the things that I don't know how many Ashkenazi know this, but Anim Zemirot is the song that is either said before opening the ark, before reading the Torah, or at the end of the service, is not something found in any other nusah. It is not in Sephardi, Edot Hamizrah, however you want to call it, Yemenite or Italian Siddurim. That is because it was written by an 11th or 12th century Ashkenazi and didn't make its way to the other prayer books. Another one, which I don't know the reason for, is there's something distinct about the Aravit, Mariv, evening prayer of Shabbat by the Italians. So other traditions basically use the same paragraphs before and after the Shema that they say during the rest of the week. And then the Amidah, the main part of the service, is unique to Shabbat. By the Italians, even the prayers before the Shema and after are unique to Shabbat, which is something interesting and not found in any of the other nusachim. And then the last thing, which I find very interesting, specifically for Yemenites, is that the Lecha Dodi, this stumbled us, okay? Because Kabbalat Shabbat essentially is a Kabbalistic addition, which means that it came in the 17th century, which means that it shouldn't really be different between the different communities because it came fairly late. It didn't have that much time to change. So that's why we also put it at the beginning of the Siddur. We made it more, we made it the same for all of them. There is one stumbling block, which I will try to look for after to show you the exact wording. But in Lecha Dodi, the Yemenites don't say, the text goes Lecha Dodi Likrat Kala Pnei Shabbat Nekabela. Okay, that's how all the nusachim say it. For some reason, the Yemenites say Nakbila instead of Nekabela. And so we thought we could just put the same text for all of them and it would be fine. But no, we have to add in a little parentheses at the end for the Yemenites so people don't stumble upon that. Now, it's the reason that I found it interesting is because usually Yemenites are very pedantic about their wording, and apparently the word is nikabela. It's not nakbila, like the original text. Why did they do that? They basically, okay, so the Yemenites didn't really have printed books. Basically, all their things were handwritten because the printing press got there very, very late. So they had handwritten text of Pirkei Avot, and in one of in Masechet Avot, okay, one of the
Chapters of the fathers.
Yeah, one of the verses there says Veve mekabel et kol adam besever panim yafot. Mekabel, okay, but in the
Translate.
And you shall receive every person with that's very hard to translate, with a joy,
Joy, pleasantry, that's fine.
yeah, pleasant. But the essence here is that in the handwritten text,
Favorably, Susanna said, sorry.
In the handwritten text that was at the disposal of the Yemenites, it said "Veheve makbil et kol adam besever panim yafot." Instead of mekabel, it said makbil. So they said, okay, well, if it's written there makbil, then in Lecha Dodi, in the same sort of structure, it should be nakbila. We're talking about receiving the face of someone, okay, right? Theoretically receiving someone. If there it says makbil, and here we are receiving the bride Shabbat, then we should be saying here nakbila also. And so that's how it made it into the Yemenite Siddur. And actually it's in a lot of the Shami ones as well, not just in the Baladi Siddur.
And there are some interesting things out there. I'm going to allow people to open their cameras in a moment. I just, if that's okay with you, is that okay? Okay. But just quickly, just explain why you focused on a Siddur for Shabbat instead of every day.
We thought it was the most practical, the most practical one. We figured that during the week, either people are praying in their homes or in a synagogue that they're used to going to. But there might be a case on Shabbat that you are being hosted by a family that prays in another synagogue, or you might want to try something new, or you're traveling to another country and you end up in a synagogue that isn't the same nusach as what you are praying in. And so we wanted, for those cases, for people to always know what their nusach is if they feel more comfortable with it, but also be able to follow along with the nusach that is in their current location. And also, which might be a little bit of a stumbling block for us, because Shabbat is a different text than during the week. During the week, you say it every single day. On Shabbat, you say it once a week. So it is, you might remember it less, and then you're probably more focused on the Siddur, so it would be more useful. That also might work against us because this is the first volume. I can guarantee there are little mistakes here and there, but overall you can follow along. It has been tested and tried, and it works.
So I have to throw out there that if there are any publishers here, it is an amazing idea because I have one. And when I went and prayed with the Bene Romi, for example, then I can, say my own prayer in Ashkenaz and then move over to the Bene Romi when he repeats the prayers, and it's an amazing. So I have to do that little promo, even though it's not there. I know Leonard had something. If you want to open your mic, everybody, please do open your microphones, your cameras, both. It's nice to have a conversation.
Yeah, I mean that issue with lahak bil, bak bil rather than mikabel is just so curious, because lahak bil in Hebrew, when you translate it, it means parallel or example, and it's a completely different meaning. I was wondering if that might be referable to a typo that a sofer might have committed back in the Middle Ages.
That's why I wanted to mention that it was a handwritten text. There is a possibility of that. There might be something in the Hebrew language that they knew more than us, and that's why they did it. I don't know, but it is important to say that it is a handwritten text, and so there is a possibility of that. Then if we say it is a mistake to the prayers, is a very interesting position. But either way, I will say that Yemenites were very knowledgeable in Hebrew, so there might be something there that we don't know. But you're right; it is a weird occurrence.
When I see stuff like that, it suggests that it's a typographical error by a sofer, and nobody corrected it. Oh, it must be it. I don't know.
I suspect that perhaps the Makbil Kol Adam B'Sefer Panim Yafot might be like a different twist on Pirkei Avot. That it's, instead of receiving people, it's like when you compare people, when you compare people to each other, you shouldn't say that this one is better than this one. That you should, they should all be on the same playing field. And I mean, that's how I would read a text that's written that way. And then the word just gets borrowed over, even though it doesn't fit. For Shabbat and the Kabbalah.
That may be, Susanna, but it sounds like drosh to me when you say that. It's okay. We do drosh all the time.
No, but we have a Yemenite course coming out soon, and I'm editing it. So one of the things they did say is, if they saw it in one place and they're used to it, they kind of just copy it down sometimes with some vocalization mistakes kind of thing, because they said it in their head and they wrote it down, and it happens when you write it down. And yes, it's like the Middle Ages, but that's where they were living.
Yeah, I think sometimes also, if a sofer came to the end of a line and he ran out of room, he would put that little hash mark, and then it would be half a word, and then somebody else came along and misunderstood what the rest of the word was supposed to be.
Could be.
It definitely could be.
I'll ask Dr. Gabriel Wasserman, Hebrew University.
Yeah. We can also ask Rabbi Dr. Ben Sion Barami. So
Why not?
we'll send it out in a follow-up email. I'll check in with him too.
Excellent. I'll let you know what Dr. Wasserman.
Yeah, send it to me and I'll send also what he says, and that would be wonderful. Okay, I'm trying to see. Oh, and that's what you said over there. I'm just looking for other questions, sorry, that came in. Persons who said that. Oh, look, we answered all these.
If people have questions now, feel free to open your microphone.
Yeah, just open your mics. I'm just looking what people typed in, sorry.
If I would ask about anything, I would ask about the process of doing this, because it seems like daunting, you know, like, did you have a lot of late nights looking over and comparing texts and like frantically looking? Was it like, what was it like?
And did you type them all?
Yeah, thanks, Emily. It was definitely a daunting task that we didn't fully process before we started working on it. And only after did we realize we may have taken on too big of a project for us, but we made it work. I will say that the lockdowns during Corona helped a lot. And we had a lot of help from my grandfather down there, my grandfather, my father, my father-in-law, and we didn't, as we said, did not write the Siddur. So we received texts and also found texts that were available online, then matched them up to Siddurim that we had of each of those traditions. And after we saw if there were mistakes or things that needed to be added, kind of trying to understand why they were missing or why they were added or that, then it was just a process of going through the text over and over and over again. Somewhere in between, we did the design and the design of the pages, figuring out like where to put, if we wanted them all chunked together, like say Ashkenazi would now have everything from the evening to the next evening, or if we wanted to do evening of the different ones, and then morning. So all of that was sort of intertwined with us reviewing the text over and over and over again. And as we don't, as I said, I don't know if I said, all of this historical background doesn't exactly appear in the Siddur itself, but we do have a little introduction. And in the introduction, we do mention that the entire week felt like Shabbat for us because we were just saying Shabbat prayers all week long. So that was generally the process. It was definitely a daunting process and a long one. And yes, late nights, also less working and studying. And as I said, lockdown really helped.
Rachel?
Yeah, now that there's not lockdown, I guess there's not lockdown still in Israel, right?
Yeah, we're done.
Yeah.
No more masks even.
Yeah. We're trying to get there in the United States, but it's shaky all over. I was wondering, what about distribution? And did you get help with publication and all that? And have you gotten feedback from people who have actually gotten the book and used it?
Those are excellent questions. The publication was our own. We went to look for a publishing house, published it as a regular book, as private citizens. One of our, or I'd say two of our sources for the Siddur itself, one of them is Siach Yerushalayim, which is a distributed Siddur of the Baladi nusah, are the ones who supplied us with it, basically. And so because there are rights to that. We can't necessarily make it public. And we also used Angelo Piatelli, who I mentioned at the beginning. We used his texts. We made corrections on it because his Italian version is more generalized or standardized to the different Italian communities in Israel. And we wanted to keep it more strictly Roman. But because we got it from other sources, we can't distribute it publicly. That being said, yet we might convince people how important it is, but we did get really great feedback, and people, it was essentially a gift at our wedding, and those who received the gift and have showed it to other people have said, wow, this is very important. This would make my life much easier on Shabbat and things like that. And so it has made its rounds, at least by word of mouth. And we did receive a lot of great feedback, aside from the fact that we love to use it and it's very useful for us personally.
Yeah, it sounds it would be really good for travelers. Because, you know, whenever we travel, we always try to see if we can find the Jewish community. And then you wind up in the synagogue where you really don't know what to say.
Exactly.
I usually travel with both an Ashkenazi and a Sephardi Siddur, so I can
see, but that's the point. This is in one. It makes so much sense.
Exactly.
Okay, so you have another question. Does the pronunciation also vary even with similar prayers? And does it go by country?
Yes, the answer to that is yes. To go through all the pronunciations would be difficult, but let's put it this way. Most of them are just based, no, not most of them. There are a lot that are based on accents. So you might be at an Italian synagogue and you might not recognize it just based on the accent, but it's basically the same based on an Italian accent. I'm not saying the pronunciation of the Hebrew. The biggest difference is in Yemenite pronunciation, and that is very, there's a reason that it's pronounced differently. It's not just because they spoke Arabic. Even people who were born and raised in Israel and don't speak Arabic pronounce the same prayers that Ashkenazim say with different pronunciation. So that is the major differentiator. A lot of people say when they go to Yemenite synagogues that they don't recognize the prayers, even if they are the same ones that they have in the Siddur from the nusah that they come from. Yeah, I hope that answers it.
I think it did, but if you can give even a few examples of the differences in pronunciation.
Yeah, so essentially they differentiate between letters that in modern Hebrew we don't, and in other communities they don't, even though you could say that I think Ashkenazim actually do use it, they just pronounce it a little bit differently. Let's say if you're pronouncing a kamatz or a patach, one is the line and one is at the half plus sign at the bottom of the letter. In modern Hebrew or in many communities, you just pronounce it as a. In Yemenite, the kamatz, which is the half plus sign, would be pronounced o. So if you're saying gadol, you wouldn't say gadol, you would say godol, because it has the gimel has a kamatz on the bottom. There are also letters that are pronounced differently because in modern Hebrew.
But before you get to that, I just want to add that if you're going to say the in Ashkenaz also, it's right. It's godol, so it's an awe instead of an ah.
Right. So it does get it did get to other places. There are also letters that we pronounce the same, even though they are two separate letters, or they might have a dot in them, which should change the word, but should change the pronunciation. but in modern Hebrew we do not. So say Gimel and Gimel. If it has a dot in it, it should have a different pronunciation, although in modern Hebrew we don't. Let's say Hagafen wouldn't be pronounced Hagafen in Yemenite pronunciation. It would be pronounced Hajofan. Jofan, because the 3 dots are pronounced A instead of E, but the point was the Gimel there. So there are also letters that are pronounced differently, which if you look at the dry text in front of you, they should be pronounced differently because they have either a dot in them or are a different letter, or we don't, but many nusachim and in modern Hebrew, we don't pronounce them differently.
Thank you.
How about-
Oh, sorry,
how about
Leonard.
the third-
Oh, sorry. Okay,
Yeah,
go for it.
How would you pronounce our third patriarch?
He's putting you on the spot to say the ayin.
Okay, but Yitzhak would also be different. Yitzhak or Yitzhak, or Yaakov or Yaakov. Yeah.
Yeah, Leonard.
Yeah, and the Sephardi Siddurim that I've read, they don't make the change from the segel to the kamatz in the last, when it's the last word in the pasuk. They say borei pri hagefen. They don't say borei pri hagofen. Just using your reference to the Yemenite example.
Thank you.
So I say hagefen when I recite Kiddush. I don't say borei pri hagofen.
No,
I think
You said
there are some grammatical rules that say that you should say with the commas.
It's not technically grammar. It's the sense that, well, it's the last word in the pasuk.
Right.
Is that grammar? Maybe.
I think Emily, right? Marush is, no, you can't do it to all panelists then. You have to do it to all panelists and attendees. She's giving you Hagefen or Hagafen and the reason behind it. So if anybody wants to continue on it, it's in the chat for everybody to see. So thank you. That's Emily, right?
No, that's Marisha.
Oh, that's Marush. Sorry. So sorry.
She's a Sephardi house.
There is a reason why I say that it's dictative, because there is a big there are some stories about why do we say Mashi Baruach Umorit Hageshem or Amorit Hagashem, and there is reasons. Among others is I believe it was the Vilna Gaon who said that you break the rules of Dikduk in order to say Morit HaGeshem, because a segel is reminiscent of Chesed. So you want to, so that's why
it's beyond grammar.
Yes, well, that's why you break grammar in order to show that you're asking for a chesed, as opposed to just saying it according to Dikduk. But I could be wrong.
Oh, what if we've gotten anything out of today, it's that there are so many different versions, and you can't say one is right. There are 70 faces to the Torah, right? There are 70 interpretations for each letter in the Torah. There are definitely many different ones, and there are different explanations for each, like we just heard. It could be something that's philosophically changed it, as opposed to the grammar, as opposed to biblical versus rabbinic grammar, as Susanna put in. So this is the tip of the iceberg, and we are so grateful to you, Dalya, for bringing it to us, because you can see how much research you did on this. And I really do recommend that somehow we get this out there, because I will attest to the fact that I've used it and it is just very, very helpful. If anybody,
I do want to just add, even though there are 70 faces and there are so many versions, it is important for me to say that they all come from the same desire, which is the prayer to God. And basically, the Siddur came about after the destruction, but also once people kind of forgot their Hebrew and forgot how to have individual prayers in the holy language. And that was part of the reason. And so the Siddur, because it came after there was already a diaspora, it also is very different, but it all is related to the original desire to connect to God through words. And the Siddur, the point of it is to say, yes, we all have our different traditions, but also we can all pray in the same synagogue and be able to follow along together. And so I just did want to add that at the end.
Now, that was a wonderful summation. I'm not going to say anything after that, other than thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you soon and continue this conversation, because it's important.
Thank you very much. So did you ever meet Dr. Wasserman, Dr. Gabriel Zachary Wasserman?
I did not, but I will look him up now.
Yeah. Okay. He's in Washington Heights today, but
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that.
okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Enjoy day or night, everybody.
Yeah, he's my son, Dalya.
Wow.
Figured.
Okay, that was terrific. Thanks.
That's
Dalya.
wonderful.
Thank you. It's great.
Thank you, everyone.
Hope to see it someday.
Very nice.
Thank you.